I can begin by welcoming everybody to our October program meeting. We're very excited to be able to see and listen to Janet and her wonderful paintings, and she can tell us her story. We'll be anxious to have that happen in just a few minutes. We do have just a few announcements, and we also are planning to go through the process of our board elections this time. So number one on the announcements is the slide that you see here. Is we are going to go ahead with our Eugene Christmas bird count. It will be the 79th Christmas bird count for the Eugene chapter of Lane County Audubon Society. So that's pretty exciting. It actually is going to happen January 3rd of 2021. That's happened before, just based on when we typically have our count. We always have it on a certain time interval after the Christmas day. And we have plans to adjust the way we do the count based on COVID-19 guidelines, which National Audubon released. And of course, we'll also be paying attention to COVID guidelines within the state of Oregon as well. Unfortunately, that means we will not get together afterwards for a chili feed. We're really sorry about that. Dick Lamster and his team leaders are currently sort of making those plans, and we'll have more details to present to you. It will also be in the next issue of the Quail. But we're anxious to have people participate under these new guidelines, and we'll try to make it fun, but also safe for everybody. So that is in our plans. That some of the Christmas bird counts are not going to proceed this year. The one that we've heard about so far that is not happening locally is the Florence count. So they will not have a Florence count. So we're waiting to hear. There will be a Cottage Grove Christmas bird count, which is the day before ours. Is that right? And then we're also waiting to hear about the Oak Ridge. So it's a little early still. People are making up their minds on how they want to try to proceed. So that's that announcement. We can move on. We have a point of business that we have to take care of as a chapter once a year. Typically, we do our board elections in May, but we were not meeting in May. So we wanted to kind of do it via Zoom. And since we don't have a visual for all of you that are out there, there's 52 people now on the Zoom program. So I'm happy to see that. But I want to call your attention to, if you go to your, get your cursor down. For me, it's at the bottom of my screen. There's a little hover it over reactions, which is makes it possible for you to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Of course, you're going to hopefully do thumbs up, but we want to have the response from you when we go through our board election process, because the board is to be elected by members. And so I will begin this process now. And if you, we have a constitution, and according to that constitution, we present a slate of candidates to the chapter, and then we go through any Lane County Audubon members that are on this call are able to participate by doing the thumbs up count. So the slate of candidates is what you see here to your left: Ramiro Aragon, Rachel Fries, Jim Maloney, Ron Rentschler, Debbie Schlenoff, Mavis Souls, and Rebecca Waterman. And I'd like to hear a motion to accept this slate of candidates, please.
I'll make a motion to accept the slate of candidates.
Thank you, Dennis. And is there somebody who can second that motion, please?
I'll second it.
Okay, we got a second.
Thank you.
So it has been moved and seconded that the slate of nominees be elected, and only Lane Audubon members can vote. But if you would please go ahead and either say aye or wave your hand in the air like this, or do the little icon like that that says it's okay with you if our slate of candidates is elected to the board. So please let us know your choice. We'd like to see a few more hands. Great, I'm seeing more hands. Awesome.
Aye.
Good job. Okay, it looks to me like the motion has passed, and congratulations to each of those newly elected board members. And thanks so much to all of you who helped participate in this process. We've done our duty now and we're all official. So thank you. And I think that we can go on to the next topic, which is Debbie and her conservation plug.
So my plug this month is just to say that I believe as citizens of the earth, we all need to be thinking about protecting the environment and the organisms that live on it. And I want to remind people that this is not a political issue. It's not a Democrat or Republican or a progressive, liberal, conservative. This is an issue for all of us that live here. And I'm just going to kind of drive that home by saying vote. Your vote is important. Your communication with your legislators are so important to make sure that we respect the environmental laws that are in place and that we continue protections for our planet. So get out there and vote if you haven't done so already, and thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Dennis. Before I do, I just want to remind people that at the end of the session today, we will take questions. We'll have a little time for a question and answer. So you can hold your question until the end, or at any point, if you want to pull down the chat, you can go ahead and type your question into the chat. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll ask the questions that you've written down from the chat. So totally up to you if you want to use chat to ask questions or just save them to the end. And Dennis, throwing it up.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to tell you a little bit about our speaker for November. This will be Ram Papish's third presentation with the Lane County Audubon Society. And this time he's going to take us to Africa. We're going to go to Tanzania and Uganda and see some gorillas and some amazing animals. As you know, Ram is an amazing artist. He's a photographer and an adventurer and a bird researcher. And he always has some fantastic stories and amazing photographs. So that'll be next month, November 24th. So please be ready for that one too. And tonight, we're going to have Janet Essley. Janet lives in Washington, but she has lived here in Eugene during the 70s and 80s. And she completed her fine arts degree at the University of Oregon. So she's an Oregonian in a lot of ways. She collaborated with Lee Tibbetts, a shorebird biologist, during a 7-year study of the amazing long distance migrant, the red knot. She's also primarily an artist and a muralist and a teacher of art for more than 30 years. And so we're excited to have her and her art and her story about the red knot. So take it over, Janet.
Okay, thank you very much. And Dennis, and thank you to Debbie for troubleshooting all the digital stuff of this. As Dennis said, I have roots in Eugene. I was very fortunate to have many wonderful artists on the faculty of the University Art Department who helped me learn to see what I was looking at and what I was looking for. And Lee Tibbetts I actually met in Eugene long before she became a bird biologist, and she has been gracious in sharing with me over the years her love and knowledge of the bird. So what I'm going to show you tonight has deep roots in Eugene. And what I'm going to show you is what I call a cultural cartography of red knots. It is a way of mapping the migration route of Calidris canutus, the red knot, through the many places where it inhabits during the year. The project started with an innocent conversation with Lee about how art could join with science to help with publication. But I'm going to show you some of the images from the cartography, and first I'll show you how it works, and then we'll sort of zoom around the world and see much of the world, and hopefully that will inspire you to look more at the website where you can get more information. So let's start. In familiar territory, and by familiar, I mean here the work of the great science illustrators of the 18th and 19th century, particularly Audubon, whom I believe that most of you are familiar with. He was a native of Pennsylvania, so that locates him right next to Delaware Bay, which is a critical migration stopover point for red knots of the rufous subspecies that migrate from the tip of Tierra del Fuego up to the high northern reaches of the Canadian Arctic. I used Audubon's print, number 315 in his folio, as the basis for this painting of the birds. Audubon stuffed his birds in order to paint them, they held still that way. And it was before the photograph, so it was a good way for artists to be able to work with birds. But he stuffed his birds in order to paint them, so they have these kind of odd postures, some of them. But then he packed his paintings with lots of information about the birds. So in his particular painting of red knots, he shows a red knot in breeding plumage, as they would be as they pass north through Delaware Bay. And then he shows a juvenile red knot in non-breeding plumage as that it would be in as it was passing south through Delaware Bay. So you have two different time periods in this same painting that Audubon painted. Now, he did not paint a horseshoe crab in his painting, which is interesting because of the relationship between horseshoe crabs and red knots, and a variety of other species of shorebirds that are critically dependent upon horseshoe eggs as fuel on their northern migrations in the spring. So I added to Audubon's composition, the horseshoe crab shell that's in the corner of the painting, as a reference to them. Thank you, Debbie. And as a reference that we probably all know about. Whole books have been written about the relationship of just red knots to horseshoe crabs. But all of us here, you probably all know, have been intimately familiar with horseshoe crab blood, because the biomedical industry has been using extracts from horseshoe crab blood to test for endotoxins in vaccines and medical equipment and devices that we all have used at some point or another in our lives. Interestingly enough, now European pharmaceuticals have found a way to synthesize the specific factor in horseshoe crab blood that identifies endotoxins, but the FDA has not licensed it for use in the United States. Now, the biomedical industry is one of many that is responding to COVID in interesting ways. So the whole issue of horseshoe crabs takes on new meaning during the time of COVID, as we're all anxiously waiting for vaccines that are safe to come about. So each of the pictures in the cartography references a specific critical habitat for shorebirds, for red knots around the world through a style of art. And it also references some of the natural history of the bird in related to time when they are inhabiting those specific sites. So this one starting with Audubon. He was a keen observer of his natural environment and a recorder of it. Let's go on to the next slide. But there are many others. Amongst them are the Inuit people of the Arctic, who are also very keen observers of the environment around them and recorded their observations of plants and animals in incised drawings on ivory and bone. So this is a big picture of what would be a tiny, tiny little drawing on ivory. You'll see colors in it, which locates it specifically as the Chukchi people of the eastern side of the very eastern edge of the Russian Arctic, who are the only ones of the Inuit peoples who used some coloring in their incisions. So locating it in the Chukchi Peninsula also locates this as part of the breeding habitat of the subspecies Piersmai, Rodgersi, and Roselari, which uses the west coast of the Pacific coast of the Americas as its flyway. This painting references a bird on a nest, a bird in the broken wing display situation, and the young chicks who are able to walk and feed themselves at birth in the tundra. Chukchi artists would not, the Inuit people did not eat shorebirds, and so they would not have been a source of for artwork, either because of their importance as a food source, and they weren't a symbolic importance in their cosmology. So red knots would not likely have been a subject matter for Inuit carving. But while doing this, in each of the places that I worked with, I was trying to imagine if I were an Inuit artist with the cultural and material things that I had to work with. How might with those criteria, make pictures of red knots? So here's my Chukchi Inuit picture of red knots as an incised ivory piece. Red knots have are remarkable members of the sandpiper family. They breed farther north than any other sandpipers above the Arctic circles, and they have one of the longest migration routes of any of the animals. Next slide. So these birds from the Chukchi Peninsula will be migrating all the way to the far end of New Zealand, shown here in this contemporary Maori style of art. Now, you know, there's only two birds that are migrants into New Zealand. One is the knots, and the other is godwits. And you're probably all familiar by now with the godwit that's recently been tracked flying from Alaska to New Zealand nonstop over the Pacific in 11 days, nonstop. An amazing thing for a small bird to do. Red knots have not been tracked that many days in flight, but they're only half the size of godwits. So, you know, their 6 to 8 day flights may be just as remarkable. But so we've located ourselves down in New Zealand with this painting. We're using contemporary Maori art styles, which now includes materials such as airbrush painting and metal sculpture and other things that are not were not traditional materials in Maori art. So the artists there are adapting, and art styles migrate themselves around the world, as everybody who has seen Maori inspired tattoos is well aware of. So birds and art both migrate, adapt, evolve. the particular reference in this painting for bird behavior is the ability of red knots, or the process of red knots doing synchronous flight, where whole groups of birds will take off at the same time and then all turn over at the same time and swoop back and forth as a way of protecting the majority of the birds from predation. Now, I don't know, Dennis, if you're going to put on for people the wonderful YouTube you sent me of huge flocks of red knots in England doing these synchronous flights called murmuration, where whole flocks will fly back and forth. But if you haven't seen it,
Yeah, Janet, that is on the website. So if
okay,
people are
great. So
interested in seeing it, they can see it there.
yeah, people should look it up. It's wonderful. Moving on. So the red knots have the longest migration flight. They are able to accomplish this by many amazing things. Before they set out on flights, they fuel up and pack their entire bodies with fat. They get rid of all the excess baggage by reducing the size of any organs and muscles that they won't be needing in flight. And so they are taking off and doing multi-day nonstop flights shown here. They fly at night, they fly in the day, they fly through storms. They lose excess heat through their legs, and they get water by the metabolism of fat. And when they finish with the fat, they catabolize their muscles. So these skinny birds here might be ones that have been on a long migration flight and are losing weight. Now, until recently, scientists were thinking that the birds that did these long nonstop migration flights were actually having half the brain asleep at one time. But more recent scientific opinion, as a result of being able to fit flying birds with technology that can perceive brain waves, is that the birds are actually staying awake for days and night at a time, maintaining their position within their migrating flock, not running into each other, keeping track of where they are, et cetera. So an amazing thing that shorebirds do and red knots do. This in the style of Brazilian artist, contemporary folk artist who does woodblock printmaking, named Jose Francisco Borges. And so this painting locates us in Brazil, specifically in a critical migration stopover point on the Maranhão Peninsula, from which point, which is at the mouth of the Amazon, from which point many of the birds that are going to Delaware Bay will take off from. Okay, now next slide. Many of these birds, most of these birds, are on their migration flights, and at their critical stopover points are eating mollusks. They are selective molluscivores. Now we're on our familiar territory for the West Coast in this Northwest Coast style of art that would locate us south of the Quinault Reservation on in the Olympic Peninsula, and just north of Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor, which is the major stopover for red knots of the Roselari subspecies on their northern migration from the Pacific coast of Mexico and farther south to Alaska and Wrangel Island in the northern part of Russia. Now, in Grace Harbor and Willapa Bay, they're eating various clams. And this particular painting comes from the story by biologist Joe Buchanan, who works for Washington State Fish and Wildlife, who tells a story of seeing red knots foraging on the beach. And he is able to see a red knot pick up a clam from the mud flats, carry it to a place where there's clear water that's in a puddle on the mud flats, wash it off, and then swallow it. So so that's what this painting indicates. The little happy clam in the yellow part is the clam in the mud, and the blue wave is it being washed around, and in the red it's in the gullet of the red knot. Now, of the sandpipers, red knots have the largest gizzard of any of the sandpipers relative to their body size. The gizzard is the organ with which they are able to grind up mollusk shells so that they can get the nutrition out from inside. And is one of the organs that they atrophy before they take their migration flights, and then they have to regrow after the migration flights in order to be able to eat again. So this again would be not something that would have been traditional for the Northwest Coast artists. The clam might have been a traditional and symbolic animal, but not red knots. But if I was a contemporary Northwest Coast artist, I would have the freedom to do all sorts of things that were not done in traditional Northwest culture, and this might be one of them. So one more, which is familiar and unfamiliar territory for many of us. Next slide. Okay, this is familiar in the sense that I think most of us today would look at this painting and say, oh, modern art. When the painting that inspired this was first painted and shown in 1910 by French artist Marcel Duchamp, it was unreadable by the public. So we have adapted, the people looking at art have adapted to their perception in changing times. The original painting was called Nude Descending a Staircase, and I adapted the concept from Nude Descending a Staircase to do this painting, Red Knots Descending the Beach. So because it's a French artist, it locates us in France, which is wintering ground for the subspecies Icelandica and a migration route for the subspecies Canutus. Red knots will forage at night if necessary. They prefer to forage by day. They have three different foraging categories. In the daylight, when they can see if there's mollusks on the surface, they forage by sight. They can peck down through the mud, and they do random pecking into the mud to look for prey, but they can also, because they have an organ on the end of their beak which can sense differences in water pressure, they can also forage something like bats using sonar, where they can see in the dark to where there might be mollusks available in the sand near them. So red knots descending the beach. So that's how the cartography works, is each image has a reference through the art style to place, and that locates us with which of the subspecies of red knots we're using, and to the critical migration staging places, and to critical breeding habitat, and to areas that they are using during the non-breeding season. Next slide. But for those of you who like the more traditional art form of Wikipedia maps, here is a map of the flyways of the different subspecies of red knots. So Rosalari using the Pacific coast of the Americas, Rufa using the Atlantic coast of the Americas, Icelandica going across the northern Atlantic from Greenland to Europe, and Canutus used South Africa all the way up the Atlantic coast of Africa and Europe to Central Siberia, and Piersma and canutas that use the Pacific side of the Asian coast down to New Zealand. So within my cartography, there are actually three paintings that are maps that may or may not be any more distorted than this map, which shows the Arctic as a very long place when it really is a circle. But I'll talk a little bit about those later. I want to show you a whole bunch more paintings. So we're going to zoom around the world, and hopefully that'll inspire some more interest in research on your part. So let's go. First thing, I want to answer the age-old question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. In the case of red knots, it's the male red knots who arrive in the breeding grounds first, who make scrapes in the sand, small circular places where they've scraped away the tundra as possible nesting sites when the females arrive, and they establish their dominance over territories with this one wings display. Next, the females arrive a little bit later in the Arctic. Now, this is painting in that modern art style of Northern Europe, shows females who in their last stopover places before going to the Arctic breeding grounds have to tank up on calcium because there's not enough calcium in where they can forage in the Arctic for them to produce eggs. So they are gathering calcium along the routes, storing it in their legs, and taking it with them. 30% of their calcium needs is going with them into the Arctic. The rest of the resources that the adults are going to need for nesting and laying eggs, they're going to find in the Arctic. Next. We're going to zoom around real fast. The Arctic breeding season is very, very fast. It's 30 days from the times the adults arrive in the Arctic to meet, make nests, lay eggs, and incubate the chicks, which both adults do. The chicks are born, hatched, and within 30 days, they have started walking, started eating, although they can't regulate body temperature for a couple of days. So they need to stay near adults for warmth for the first few days. But then they're walking on their own, growing their flight feathers, and walking possibly several miles before they can fly from their nesting sites to the Arctic shore, from which they'll take off on the southern migration. The young ones' defense posture is this freeze down into the tundra way of hiding from predators while they're walking across the Arctic to the places from which they fly south. Next, what they're doing there is eating insects. There is a lot of light in the summer in the Arctic, so that they have lots of time to forage by sight. The chicks, when they're born, their beaks aren't hard enough to be probing into sand anyway. They don't have gizzards, so they are eating insect resources. But if the chicks in the Arctic, if the timing of their being there is out of sync with the insect hatch in the Arctic, it can be significant for the chicks. As we all know that early childhood nutrition is very important. It is also for red knot chicks. So this painting is showing adult birds on the left who've arrived in the Arctic in the height of the insect hatch, all those tiny little green and yellow insects there, having lots to eat. And the smaller birds over on the right being the young of the year that have fewer resources to eat, and they will be smaller and have shorter bills than the adults. This may affect their southern migration flight, and it can affect them later on in life, as the young birds will stay in their southern non-breeding habitat for 2 years before they reach sexual maturity. And if they have smaller body size and therefore shorter bills, they may not be able to reach down in the mud to the layers in the sand where high protein mollusks are, and may be eating seagrass roots instead, which will have less protein in them, therefore having the cascading effect of less protein, smaller bodies, so that when they are getting ready to migrate, they may not be as robust as otherwise for the migration flights and breeding for the next generation. Next. So this is one of the other maps, an actual map within the cartography. The circles in this show in the green section on the left the different nesting sites in the Arctic, and on the right against the blue, they show the essential migration stopover points. So the one at the top center is the shoreline of the Arctic, and then thank you, Debbie, and then the stopover places on the migration route with the track between them. Now, this painting is in the style of wonderful Quebec and First Nations artist Norval Morisseau, so it locates us in Quebec. It locates us near the essential migration stopover place at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River called the Mingan Archipelago, where birds from the northern Canadian Arctic are flying to begin their southern migration route, where they're going to make a nonstop jump from the mouth of the St. Lawrence River across the Atlantic Ocean during hurricane season to the Maranao Peninsula at the mouth of the Amazon River, which is the blue circle in the blue in the lower right, and then on to critical sites in Argentina and to Tierra del Fuego at the tip of South America. Besides the map of this painting, this also references interesting biological information. The redknots and other sandpipers leave the Arctic in 3 waves. The first is the female, who on the right with the yellow circles in her body, who has used up half her body weight laying her 4 eggs, and so is relatively, as soon as the eggs have hatched, she takes off for the southern migration. She has to bulk up again so that she can do this. The males stay and raise the chicks. So the yellow male with the blue belly is dad, who has stayed in the Arctic to raise the chicks. He also leaves the Arctic before the chicks, the one with the green belly on the left, are ready to fly. So they are making the southern migration without adult guidance. So hopefully we and the birds will all be around long enough for us to understand the perceptual abilities that make this possible. So now we're keep going. These birds are flying south across the ocean. They are navigating by the stars, by their sense of magnetism, of the Earth's magnetism, and other things that we don't understand yet about their abilities to do these navigation flights. Next, when they arrive where they're going, they forage in large groups. They've been solitary, dad and the chicks in the Arctic, and now they're large groups of redknots foraging on the beach together at low tide. Next, at high tide, they are roosting, and next, and preening feathers, keeping their flight feathers their body feathers waterproof and their flight feathers in condition for making the migration flights, and they are doing this also, next slide, in large groups of mixed species birds on mud flats, both mixed species resident birds of wherever they are, in this case Padre Island in Texas, and other migratory birds. But because of all the different sizes and shapes of bird beaks, they are able to find different food resources and are not competing with each other. We're going to move on quickly to conservation challenges of red knots. I need to give my apologies to the hyena, who is a really wonderful animal in its own right, but it is standing in here in this Nigerian Oshogbo School legend painting for industrial development, specifically here for offshore oil drilling. But that's not the only thing that will affect shorelines. As you know, upstream logging can affect sedimentation on mudflats and estuaries. Mining inland can release pollutants, which changes the chemistry of bays, and therefore the ability of invertebrates to live there, and therefore going up the food chain into what food sources are available for migrating birds. Next, human development is, human uses are a problem. Our industry is a problem, but there's places also where we are actually in direct competition with shorebirds for mollusks. They're a selective molluscivore, and we like eating shellfish. In the Wadden Sea of the Netherlands, dredging for cockles actually caused the red knots breeding there have to switch preferred food sources to another one when there wasn't enough left, young cockles left for red knots. But habitat restoration works, and Netherlands biologists have been doing a wonderful job restoring meadowlands for a variety of migrating and resident breeding shorebirds, as seen in this picture. Where are we? Not only is there direct next slide, direct competition, there's also indirect competition in this painting of shorebirds with horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs, we're using horseshoe crabs, so although we're not eating them, we're using them. We have eaten them in the past, in that in Audubon's time, they were used for fertilizer for fields and hog food, and now they're used as bait fish for other marine resources that we're using. And the lack of horseshoe crabs as eggs for turtles and eels and different types of marine animals can cause a ripple effect through the food chain of a lot of marine fisheries that we're only beginning to be aware of and know how to deal with. And so that's a conservation issue. Now, there is a huge initiative going on the East Coast now, the Horseshoe Crab Conservation Initiative, of which the Audubon Society is a member, and doing very important work. Next slide. How are we doing for time there, Debbie and Dennis? The horseshoe crab, the rise and fall of horseshoe crab population has affected the red knot population significantly over time. This has shown up in the plummeting of red knots in the 2000s as a result of the plummeting populations of horseshoe crabs. And although horseshoe crabs sometimes seem stable and sometimes don't, the red knot population is not back to what it was before the year 2000, and it's fascinating that it wasn't until the 1980s that biologists actually understood where the red knots of the rufous subspecies were breeding in Tierra del Fuego, of which this picture references, and were able to get ground line population numbers for red knot rufous, and practically they had just gotten their baseline numbers, and then the population crashed for unknown reasons. So rufa subspecies is on the threatened species list, and extinction is quite possible. So next. That's the bad news, but the good news is that habitat restoration is possible, as this painting is a homage to conservationists, Mexican conservationists who are doing habitat restoration at the mouth of the Colorado River at the northern end of the Sea of Cortez, where the young red knots, those gray birds at the bottoms that are not sexually mature yet, will stay, and with resident estuary birds in the upper estuaries of Mexico. Next, and in another site in Mexico, here from Guerrero Negro, the Vizcaíno Biodiversity Reserve in Baja, referenced in this picture, which the biodiversity reserve, which has species of sea turtles, and 30% of the Roselari red knots spend their winter there, and an equal percentage of godwits and dowagers are spending the non-breeding season in Baja, in Ojo de Liebre Lagoon, which is a major source for an industrial salt plant. So where the salt evaporation ponds can be used and managed for habitat for shorebirds and other species, and become a place where whales can also be, and ecotourism can help with local industry. So it is possible for us to cohabitate with the birds. We just have to figure out how to do it. Next. Education is another important way for us learning how to do birds, and this picture references important, wonderful education efforts by biologists in San Antonio Oeste, Argentina, that have as their town mascot Fabian the red knot, who, like our Smokey the bear, helps people understand the importance of red knots in and of themselves, and to the local economy, and how people can help shorebirds in this particular case by keeping their dogs on leashes so birds are not disturbed on the beach on their migration flights. It's critical at all their stopover points that they get to spend as much time as possible eating, so that they can keep their fuel resources to replenish what they've already used and to build up for the next stage of their migration flight. Moving on, this next picture shows one of those disturbed loopy places where birds would have to move instead of being able to stay in place and forage. And this refers to wonderful efforts by biologists and conservationists around the world to get regulations for sport hunting of shorebirds, especially in the Caribbean, and referenced here the Guyana coast of South America. The Audubon Society, Delaware Audubon, has also been very helpful to the local Surinamese conservationists and rangers to help educate local people who might be using shorebirds as food sources to the needs of migrating shorebirds, and to try and help educate people with new agricultural developments along the coast to shoot shorebirds as pests, which is a sad state of affair. Agroecologists are trying to bring back old practices before chemical pesticides of birds as the aid to farmers to keeping down insect populations that destroy crops. So many kudos to the biologists and conservationists in the Audubon Society for this important educational work that they are doing. Next slide. There are also efforts, international efforts referenced in this painting for conservation of migratory species. This is a kente cloth referencing therefore Ghana on the west coast of Africa. The traditional kente cloth was used like the what do we call it on the East Coast? The wampum belts on the East Coast of the Americas, as they are contracts between people, and kente cloth is a leader in his people, and there are wampum belts that are contracts between the 5 nations of the Iroquois people and the United States of America at the end of the Revolutionary War, contracts between people. And so that's what this references, the international treaties for conservation of migratory species. And again, make sure you go vote. Next slide. And there are also other conservation efforts, marine biosphere reserves, Ramsar wetland sites, and those are referenced in this painting, which is also another form of a map. It is a map of islands in the Bijagos archipelago, a series of 80 islands off the coast of Guinea-Bissau. Because of traditional culture in the archipelago, there are many of these islands where there is no human habitation. As a result of that, there has been wildlife that has continued to this day in those sites. So in the circle on the right, which represents the bottom quarter of a calabash, millions of migrating shorebirds use the migrating birds and breeding birds use the Bijagos archipelago. It is also the site of 5 species of endangered sea turtles, use it to breed. Endangered hammerhead sharks also use the area, and the only species of marine hippopotamus is here. So all these things are happening in the Bijagos archipelago. It is a Ramsar site. It is a marine biosphere reserve, and it has been proposed for a World Heritage Site because of its unique human culture for the UN. Now, and that's this really sort of ironic thing to me. This site still exists with all these animal species because the local human culture said that humans were not allowed on most of the islands there. But in trying to get economic income for Guinea-Bissau, various things have been proposed for the islands. Non-polluting things like shipwrecking yards. But ecotourism is another thing that is promoted for the islands, and ecotourism is wonderful, but a double-edged sword, because while ecotourism would bring people into the Bijagos archipelago, now you have to house these people and you have to transport them to islands where people have not been allowed, and therefore the wildlife is there. And the tourists bring in cell phones and cameras and many other things that will endanger the local culture that allowed this place to exist in this first place. So many issues. Now, I'm going to finish with one last slide, and then we can get to any questions if anybody has them. And this is a slide of the crossing of the Mediterranean Sea and a Mediterranean on the northern migration of canutus, some of which birds follow the Atlantic coast and others just jump across the Sahara Desert to Tunisia and then fly on to Northern Europe. And I was looking at the art of an amazing French-Tunisian mural artist who does these wonderful Arabic calligraphy murals. And I toyed with Arabic and finally decided that I was not capable of pulling that off, but I could write English letters backwards so that they had a sort of Arabic script tilt to them. And then remembered that another Mediterranean artist, Leonardo da Vinci, wrote all his notes backwards so that they could only be read in mirror image in a way to protect his intellectual property rights. So in the Mediterranean tradition, and reading from right to left and top to bottom, this clearly says, red knots, godwits, shorebirds, humans, we travel together into our future. So any habitat preserved for shorebirds is actually protecting us as ocean rises, as agricultural resources are going to change. We are together with the birds in all this, and any conservation of birds is conserving our future also. So there they is, all, let's go on to next two if you want to see. There's, for those of you who are photographically inclined, there's shorebirds in Grays Harbor. Be there or be square, May 12th, if you want to see them in breeding plumage on their northern migration here. Next. If you want to learn more about shorebirds, two books. One, The Narrow Edge, all about shorebirds and horseshoe crabs by Deborah Kramer. Wonderful book. Beautiful ink drawings in the book. Lots of information. Another book you can get, it has photographs and is written for the younger set. So all of us who are over 60 would find this right up our alley, called The Moonbird, A Year on the Wing with the Great Survivor B95, which is a shorebird that was tagged in Argentina and was sighted for 20 years. So after that, and so this bird migrated enough to get to the moon and back, and so got the common name moonbird. Now there's also a bird from South Africa that was also attracted at being able to do that also. So there, and next slide, there's my information on how to contact me. You can see the website for my cartography if you want to go to it, theredknotsproject.org. If you want to contact me, there at my Gmail. If any of you are interested in this little image of this one, let's see if I can, does it show here on the screen, this image of the birds flying nonstop flight. It is in the calendar of the Syracuse Cultural Workers in my 2021 Peace Calendar, and as a holiday greeting card, and you can contact them if you're interested. And if any of you want to see other work of mine around Eugene, go out to 299 Garfield Street and see the mural at Oregon Woods. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. To read them, I need to get my glasses on.
What a wonderful adventure. Thank you, Janet.
So I am I am an artist in residence, which means that I have painted all these in my residence, and I've done all the research from my residence. So I have zoomed around the world, and this project has been so interesting because I have researched all these art styles around the world and sort of met in an odd sort of way biologists around the world. So when I have questions, I ask Lee, who then, you know, asks somebody in Russia or somebody in Holland or somebody in India for the answer to my questions. So it has been a great adventure, and intellectually trying to do this has been very challenging and wonderful. Yeah. Am I supposed to read these questions? Yeah. So if anybody's interested in prints of any of the artwork, please feel free to contact me via my Gmail account. I'm happy to do commissions. So you're not into red knots, you're into oyster catchers. I'd be happy to do that for you, etc.
Janet, this was just fantastic. I wrote a little note to you in the chat thing, but I didn't see any questions. Oh, there is one there about
Yeah. So all these,
what medium do you use?
all these paintings are in acrylic paint, and I tried to make some of them look like watercolors or woodblock prints or screen prints like the Cape Dorset printmakers. The Little Prince one is Saint Antoine de Saint-Exupéry painted watercolors, so I tried to make that look like a watercolor. But everything is in acrylic paint. Back here, and on my screen, you can see me. This is the original in the size it is of my painting of the Audubon painting. So they're all the same size and they're all in acrylic paints. And I've had any number of people ask me how I got this sculpture of an Arctic comb that, well, it's not an Arctic comb, it's a painting that's made to look like an Arctic comb. And if you can make things look three-dimensional with a little bit of work.
There was also a question about the material. What do you paint on? Is it canvas or paper? Or?
Oh, all these paintings are on 300-pound watercolor paper. So they're all on paper, yeah, which is wonderful stuff. 300-pound watercolor, Fabriano watercolor paper for the artists amongst you that have some idea of what papers mean. It's great stuff.
Well, Janet, this has just been a fascinating way for you to present a basically biology-filled story. I really never experienced anything quite like it. It was wonderful. And
Thank
so
you.
I really want to thank you so much.
You.
It's just been
Well,
delightful.
there's a lot more information about both the biology of the birds and the art from different places on the website. So I encourage you to look at it. It's hard to stuff 7 years of work into 45 minutes.
Well, you did a most excellent job of that, and your artwork is phenomenal. It's
Thank
so
you.
varied. I mean,
Yeah.
what a talent you have.
So I'm going to be doing another Zoom talk like this with some different pictures and a slightly different focus for the Friends of Haystack Rock on November 11th. It's a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. But if you wanted to see that, there will be some of the same pictures and some different ones. Contact the Friends of Haystack Rock to find out what the Zoom link would be.
Oh, good. Yeah. I noticed tonight, Paul Engelmeyer, who lives over in Yahut, was on our presentation. Is he the one who's setting that up with you?
Yeah, he's been my promoter. Yeah.
Well, he's really good at that.
Yeah.
Janet, I want to send you one of our patches.
Oh, great. Good.
I'll contact you, so I'll hand this off to you and you can virtually accept it. So
thank you. Love to. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here tonight.
Great.
Thanks to everyone else for tuning in. We had 55 people on, and so I think that was a really nice turnout for such a wonderful presentation. It was
great. Thanks for having me. It's fun to do and always fun to be in Eugene.
Yes, We're glad you were here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Linda.
very much.
And so our next program, as Dennis had mentioned, will be the November program with Ram Papish, and we'll be visiting Africa on that with his photos and his stories, which should be lots of fun. So I hope everybody stays safe and stays well, and we're so glad you joined us tonight for Janet's wonderful program. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Good night.
Medium, this Zoom thing.
Good night, Janet.
Night.
Thanks, Janet.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Great, thanks for doing that, setting it up.
There was Charlie.
Bye.
Hi, Charlie.
From Paul Engelmeyer to everyone. Excellent, Janet. Loved it.
Thanks, Paul. Another person who does wonderful work in the world.
Yes, he does.
And another person I met in Eugene.
Oh, all right. That's great. He's a dynamo.
He is a dynamo. Indeed.
All right. Thanks, Debbie, for your help. Ron,
Yes, thank you very much, Debbie. for
Oh,
all-
thank you. I loved it. Thanks so much.
it was amazing.
Wonderful evening.
Yeah.
Everybody. Bye.
Good night, folks.
Good
Take
night.
Night.
care.